Hi guys, welcome back to a very special episode of 343. I'm your host AF, joined by my co-hosts Jason and Nikita. Also joining us today is legendary football referee Keith Hackett. Keith is a former football referee, former FIFA listed football referee. He refereed in the Football League and then later on in the Premier League. He also officiated games in the FA Cup, in the League Cup, the Euros, and the Olympics. And since retiring, he's had the title of heading the PGMOL, which is the Professional Game Match Officials Limited. And he's been a UEFA expert as well. Thanks so much for joining us, Keith. It's truly an honor to have you on the show.
Great. Yeah. Anything that's talking football is just right for me.
Lovely.
Great stuff. So as we normally do with our guests that join the show for the first time, we have a bit of an icebreaker. So this one is going to be a bit personal to you. Back in the 1990-1991 season, you refereed a game between Manchester United and Arsenal. The game is famously known for the 21-man brawl that erupted when Brian McClare gave Nigel Winterburn a bit of a kick while laying down on the ground. Chaos then ensued. So my question for you is, what was the feeling of being at the center of all of that chaos, and how did you end up navigating all of it?
When you referee at Old Trafford or any of the big grounds in England or around the world, then it's a fabulous experience because I'm a football fan. And the great thing about refereeing is you're close to the action and you're seeing the star players. That day at Old Trafford sparked from nothing really, because of course it was a sly kick, but we didn't have VAR. My assistants or linesmen, as they were then, didn't come forth with "there's a problem." All we had was 21 players piling on top of each other, and I was in the middle of it. You know, I had my colleagues after the match, referees at that particular time, saying, Keith, you don't do that. You stay out, watch. And I'm going, listen, if I can prevent a mass brawl on the pitch, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get involved. I'm going to use my size and weight. It calmed down very quickly. It was about 16 seconds of mayhem, and it was mayhem. I'd been blowing my whistle fairly hard, and I'm left with a decision to make. Which player do I send off? Or how many do I send off? And I'm as honest as the day. So it's either 21 or none. Because I've not seen anything other than players. I used to say with handbags at 7 paces, they're growling at each other, threatening each other, but nothing ever happens really. You don't get a boxing punch, usually. So I sat back or stood back and decided I'm not going to issue any red cards. But what I am going to do is get a very detailed report together that actually said this is what happened, the time of the match, my position. And then we went to the FA and there was a hearing. And I was called into that hearing to give my view. And I said, look, what I saw on the field was covered by players because they're all piling in. And then they showed me a clip of the one that you just mentioned, Brian McClare. And I said, look, in reality, you know that if I'd seen that and I was clear who had kicked who and for what purpose, I wouldn't have had any hesitation in issuing a red card. But I'm not issuing a red card if it's unfair, and neither am I going to guess. So as a consequence of that, the FA took on board what I had to say, what others had to say, and came away and said, right, you better go. Pardon me? You can leave now. You can go back to Sheffield, which was a 2.5-hour journey on the train. And when I get off the train in Sheffield, there's a reporter waiting for me saying, are you aware that both teams, for the first time in English football history, had been deducted points? I said no. And the outcome doesn't worry me. And they go, what do you mean? I said, well, I dealt with it on the day. I saw it and reported the matter. That's the end of it for me. I'm not really interested in whether a player gets suspended or a fine. And I remain that way to this day. The one thing I did was I sat back and chatted to other referees and said, look, I have to tell you that if this happens to you, this is a really difficult scenario. And then when after I retired from refereeing, I took the referees in a workshop, all the professional referees, and said, right, okay, I'm going to show you this clip. How can we avoid this, or how can we actually get a better outcome? And we wrote down a criteria, which is adopted by many countries now. And that is that the referee's there in the middle of the action. Ideally, he stays out and doesn't pile in like I did. The two assistant referees, the one nearest the technical area, comes into the field slowly, the other one pretty quick. And then the if you like, the assistant coming in from the technical area is viewing any runners. And what I'm saying then is, I'm going to involve you in the process. And if there are any reds, I'm going to issue the red cards. First, I'm then going to ask you if you've seen anything untoward that might also require a red card. And then I'll do my yellow cards and then follow asking you if there are any more yellow cards. And it's interesting because we discussed that. And I think it was in 1996 when Howard Webb, the World Cup final referee, was in charge of Arsenal-Chelsea in a Wembley final, the Carling Cup final. And in the 90th minute, he had a brawl. And he went correctly through that procedure, which resulted in initially 2 players being red carded. And then there was a player who'd lost complete control of himself. He got a red card. The managers had come onto the field of play, by the way. They weren't issued red cards then, but they were reported and subsequently paid fines. So out of what was a 3-minute mayhem, we had three red cards and 2 yellow cards issued by Howard Webb, operating the VAR or the process and criteria that was in place. So we learn from it. And that's what refereeing is about. Can you improve? Can you reduce errors, because we're human beings? And can we actually, and the reason I'm sort of never fudge an issue is because as referees, we actually learn from our errors. We try and avoid them. And the only way is to admit we've made an error and then discuss it. Rather than actually try and fob fans off around the world saying, I'm right, what I've done is perfectly right, when everybody realizes it's not. So fairly long-winded answer to the question, but I've tried to give you an insight.
That answer was better than what I ever could imagine. So thank you so much for that. Nikita, was there anything that you wanted to mention?
No, I just thought, I'm listening to Keith now and I'm thinking, if the PGMOL could come out once a week and speak, maybe not as candidly, because, fair, they need to defend their position as well, but open themselves up to public engagement. Yes. Following a week of any sort of wrongdoings or correct doings or justifications or non-justifications, like Keith has just done now, about a process that they follow as referees, I feel I would have much better weeks, other than stewing after a game when a really awful decision has been made and we all know it's awful. And then it's nothing. It's almost the stoic stance from the PGMOL to say, we've done nothing wrong. We're not even going to look at it, and we're not even going to entertain your concerns as fans. Yeah.
Nikita. I knocked on the door of the Premier League and said, we've got to go professional with our referees. And at that time, they offered me the role, but I wasn't prepared to live in London. And then a couple of years later, they said, Keith, take it over. I said, I'm going to take it over. There's going to be accountability. And those referees that are selected for the games will be the referees that are in form. And if there are errors, we're going to discuss them openly. And at that stage, then I started to give our referees media training so that post-match, the referee would be available to answer any questions. In reality, that lasted for about 2 weeks because we had a red card and the referee, I can tell you, gave exactly the correct decision. It was a red card offence. And he was asked the question and he gave a great deal of detail, what he saw, what the outcome was and the reason he issued a red card. And on Monday morning, my desk, my phone was absolutely red hot. And the other side of the telephone was a club chief executive saying that you've wiped out our ability to actually post an appeal. But I operated it differently to the guy that took over from me, because in that period in office, I actually demoted referees, I promoted referees,
that's what we need.
I suspended referees because I decided that I was perhaps a little bit conceited, but I decided that I was going to operate as the 21st manager in the Premier League, 20 clubs, and I was going to be the 21st. And I went round the clubs. I talked to the managers. I found a great deal out. How did they cope with a player who'd lost form? Was he selected? What chance would they give that player? And of course, it was then about making them accountable. So if the number 9 keeps missing an open goal, he's not going to play next week. But what they will do is they'll put him on the field in the training ground and coach him and coach him and coach him so that he improves. And when he improves and demonstrates he improves in the reserves, he's then open for selection into the Premier League. And so we had, and I operated exactly that same thing. I brought in sports science, vision scientists. I changed the whole works of refereeing. And in fact, that then was followed by UEFA and in other countries. Accountability is so important. Communication is vital. So usually on a Monday morning, I was talking to Sky about incidents. And there's no point in fudging an error.
Yeah.
You know, if you actually get to the basics of refereeing, there's a process. And I hope I'm not boring you. It's first of all to see the incident, recognize the incident, think about the incident, and then react.
Yeah.
So when you examine, as I've done, hundreds, if not thousands of errors made by referees at the elite level, then you're actually going through that process. And invariably, the first line problem is they don't see. They're unable to see the incident. And so part of that is what we've got now, currently. With some of our referees, they're lazy. I've given them, you know, I'm no longer the boss, but I gave them sports science, I gave them sports psychology, nutritionists, you know, and vision scientists. So they had the full package that a football club would get at Arsenal, Manchester United, or wherever. And sadly, I see lazy referees because no one is giving them a kick up the rear. No one is actually saying to them, the reason why you made that error was because you weren't there. You were out. So when I left, there were referees like Howard Webb, and I'll quote him. He was covering about, on average, 11,500 meters per game. And he probably did about 1,500 meters at 7 meters per second. So I was moving the whole idea of officiating from perception into the world of reality. So saying, to the fans, this is why they make errors. You know, and then also mirroring what players were doing, because, you know, we look at a player now, he will do on average 50 sprints. When I did my analysis through a product called Prozone, we were doing 25. So I brought in a running coach, I brought in a sprint coach, and I've said, right, okay, what I want is I want these guys to be quicker off the mark. Because when we put a high-speed camera on, slow motion, we could see that referees are vertical, where players are shaped forward.
Yeah, forward, yeah.
Forward.
Yeah.
So we were vertical. So what was happening was, somebody like Thierry Henry would pick up the ball, our body in slow motion would go back and go forward, and that would take 3 seconds. And that 3 seconds meant that we were 20 meters down on distance. So we had to start training the referees in terms of what was the best foot to explode off. How could we strengthen it in our exercises? And of course, the initial problem was that referees were sprinting, but then they were looking at the floor. And the floor, just like the ball, never commits an offence. So we have referees who are looking at the ball, where it's landing, and watching it in the sky. And I say to young referees, don't worry about the ball, judge where it's going to land, the dropping zone, because that never made an offence. It never committed an offence, the ball. Players. So you need to keep your eyes on players. So I think that aspect of it, the communication, is so important. And, you know, there's no problems with referees in their ability to communicate. They're generally all good communicators. And they're pretty honest in terms of talking openly about their errors. Because I used to do that every week. I used to have the referees in a group. We would show we'd try to get a balance, in fairness, but we were all interested in who's made an error. And then what we'd do is we'd have that error on the big screen. And we'd say to the referee involved, talk us through that particular incident. How did you get to that decision? And they'd be open and honest and say, missed it because I wasn't there. I'm not going to guess. And then we'd start talking about how he could move on the field of play to improve his distance from ball. We were measuring distance from ball anyway on the electronic systems that we had. And then, of course, there were things that I introduced. You know, as a referee, I was going to the Olympic Games and doing World Cup games, and having to look at an assistant referee, a linesman, carrying a little flag somewhere in the corner. Try and pick that up. It's a skill set. Whilst I'm trying to watch the game, I've got to look at whether my assistant is going to flag. So I brought in the communication kit. I can tell you initially, I just did that off the top. I just went to the Premier League and said, I need a couple of 300,000, I think. I want to kit all my girls out with communication kits. And we purchased them. And then I had a short note from FIFA saying, these are illegal. You can't use them because they've not been through IFAB. And I just went, I've seen the benefit, I'm using them. But when I wanted to, you know, I noticed the Manchester United badge. Well, I was at Old Trafford, boss of the PGMOL. And Roy Carroll then was the goalkeeper of Manchester United. He dropped the ball a good metre over the line. It was a goal. But the referee was near the halfway line, and the assistant was in line with the secondary most defender, the right position. So there was no chance. So that's when I went to the Premier League summer conference shortly afterwards and said, I want to goal line technology. But because I went through the right protocols, it took us 6 years. Hawkeye came up with goal line technology and to my criteria that I wrote, which was, I don't want any referees involved. I don't want a referee involved. And he went, what?
That's a pretty good standard. Yeah.
All I
Less
want you
human
to tell, all I want you to say to that referee, goal. I don't want you to say no goal. I just want goal.
Mm.
Keep it that close. And of course, although we've had a couple in the last couple of seasons, one recently in a championship game where it didn't signal, generally it's been a faultless performance, really, and a faultless piece of kit.
I think that's single-handedly the most empirical and most accurate piece of technology or change to the game that they've added.
Yeah, pretty much agree with
in
that.
In the history of football, other than the offside rule, probably.
Yeah.
I've seen that incident in the championship.
Yes.
That's the first one I've seen.
Yeah.
Other than that, no, as you say, it's just indisputable. It's a machine that tells you the ball's over the line or nothing, as you say.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was rather surprised because Hawkeye came out a couple of weeks ago or a week ago to actually explain why there was an error. And it really surprised me because we had not experienced that in 2-3 years of testing. You know, when we got the system really accurate. And the small things are that probably people are not aware is that we moved from 3 cameras around each goal to 7. So around each goal for goal line technology is 7 cameras. We moved the speed of the cameras from less than 100 frames per second to 500 frames per second in order to secure a quick and accurate decision. We looked at cameras in goals, in the goalpost fitted in. But what we found very quickly was that goalposts, even in the very best stadiums, were not vertical. And neither were they parallel. So you had one goal that way and this way. And then when you put the camera on the post and the ball hit it, this continued. The waving effect on the goalpost lasted for some time. So that's why we went for fixed cameras, adjustable accordingly, in order to give ourselves an accurate decision. And the speed of it, I was very pleased with it. You know, I mean, I'd actually left the PGMOL as the boss to become the referee ambassador for the Premier League, going around the world running workshops in Johannesburg, in Cameroon, in Nigeria.
Oh, that's nice.
Kenya, and all the likes. I mean,
everywhere besides Cape Town.
I mean, one of the guys who came to my workshop in Cameroon, right? Elvis Nupu was on the final. He ran the line on the final of the African Nations Cup, and we're not talking about that many years ago that I was doing that particular role. And so there has been a number of referees at that level that came out of the townships or whatever, you know, and became international referees, which I take more pride about that than getting a gold medal for refereeing some final somewhere.
No, that's great. Nice. We have about 10 to 15 minutes left. Jason, do you have any questions from your side?
Sorry, I was on mute there. Just a quick one. So obviously we're living in an age of VAR, right? And everything gets reviewed, all these contentious decisions. I have a few that I could think of, but I just wanted to know, Keith, if you have any contentious decisions that had occurred previously before the introduction of VAR that you would have liked to have VAR. And I mean, obviously as an Englishman, probably Diego Maradona comes to mind. But if there's anything else, you know, yeah,
well,
just a little insight.
I think you always look at your personal bit. I can remember doing an FA Cup semi-final at Villa Park in the Midlands, a game between West Ham United and Nottingham Forest. And 3 days before that game, we were informed that our interpretation as referees on the denial of an obvious goal-scoring opportunity was incorrect. We were all looking for almost a reckless challenge or one that endangered the safety, a red card offence, before we would actually issue a red card for the denial, we were told on the Thursday, I was told, along with other referees in the Premier League or the Football League then, that any foul, if he denied an obvious goal scoring opportunity outside the penalty area, would be a red card. And in this particular game, that happened. And I sent Tony Gale off. It ruined the game. And, you know, I'm being blunt and honest. I'd love to have had VAR. I would have looked at that screen forever to avoid giving that player a red card.
Yeah.
Because when I look back, I have a regret in football, and that is the one regret that I had. It resulted, by the way, in death threats. It resulted in me having to take a great deal of care where I went and when I went, in that sense, which is the dark side of the game. But in reality, I've met Tony Gale still since. He still doesn't forgive me, and there are many West Ham fans out there who don't like Keith Hackett. But what we're seeing in England, if I may, with VAR, is a disaster. I can't put any other word on it. Constantly, week in, week out, with the aid of a VAR system that is supposed to improve the decision making. We're never going to sanitize. We're always going to have errors in the game. That's the nature, because a lot of the laws are subjective. But what we have got is we've got blatant errors, and we've got undue interference with the VAR operators. And that's because the person running the PGMOL at the moment, who's increased his budget from the 5 million that I used to spend. So this is not about money. 5 million pounds was what it was invested when I was the boss, when I left that particular year. That figure now is 23 million pounds per season.
Wow.
So that's what's getting invested in refereeing at the elite level in England. So it's not money. This is about leadership, lack of. This is about lack of direction. And so we had, you know, we've had countless errors. And just obviously before the passing of Queen Elizabeth, in the last weekend of football, last weekend was called off, of course, rightly so. But in that particular weekend, I think it was the worst season, or worst weekend I've ever seen. English football.
I think all of us
you know, we had the goalkeeper coming out at the feet of Bowen of West Ham. Yeah. He jumped over it. There might have been slight contact, but that's football. It's a contact sport, and a good goal wiped out. We then go to we go to Newcastle United, where VAR interfered unduly when Willock, the Newcastle United player, was pushed into the goalkeeper. I'm watching the game, by the way, and I've said a penalty kick, but the ball ends into the back of the net. And I've said to people who sat with, that's a goal. I'm giving a goal now. Oh, it's a penalty. No, I'm giving a goal. It's gone in the back of the net. And then what happens? VAR comes in and they say, we've ruled it out for the push by the Newcastle player on the goalkeeper. You could see very clearly that the Newcastle player had been pushed.
Yeah.
So you had that. Then at Nottingham Forest, for the first time in I can ever remember, we had a penalty kick awarded by Michael Oliver, our best referee at the moment. And Michael gives a penalty kick. Defenders caught it or almost acted like a goalkeeper. It's a penalty. And then we have VAR coming in. And he reviews it. And I'm thinking, why is VAR coming in? Because this is not a clear and obvious error. This is an accurate, correct decision.
Yeah.
Fortunately, Michael Oliver showed great strength by saying, I'm not accepting the norm of the automatic, the VAR is right. I'm going to stick with my decision. That's an absolute rarity. And then at Leeds United, the manager went scatty. I'm not surprised, because here was a Forest player going into the penalty area, left-hand side, referee's in a great position. I'm thinking the shirt's pulled outside the box, fine. He's not going to give that award. He's waited. And I'm thinking, this is good refereeing. It's now a penalty kick. It's a clear penalty kick, clear as day. This is a clear penalty kick. It doesn't come. And I've gone, what? Why no penalty? So I've decided, rather than criticize, as I've been doing week in, week out, I've looked and said, you know, I write for the Daily Telegraph here in Sheffield, in England, and I said, look, I've got to come up with something that actually improves, rather than destroy everybody, and join the wagon load of fans who are rightly calling for people's head. So what I said was, I said this: 7-point plan. 1, we need a new boss. Get rid of the one, because he's useless. So I'm not pulling any punches. He's had long enough. He's worse than the captain of the Titanic. At least the guy on the Titanic recognized that the ship was sinking. This guy hasn't.
Yeah.
So we need a new boss. We know that Howard Webb is going to be the boss in December, but that's too late, because this is getting worse. So they need an interim boss. We operate from a centre in Stockley Park. It's an ivory tower, and I would close it. I'd close it tomorrow, because I want the VAR operators at the ground.
100%.
You know, years ago, one of the things that I did was, you know, I spent time with sports psychologists and other people outside the game and other sports. And, you know, when you've got a team effort, then the team gels, you know. The relay in athletics, if you take the 4x100 relay, interestingly, those guys are faster than an individual running the full 400. So teamwork is part of the system. So for me, I brought the assistant referees together with the referee. I mean, I started that regime, and I said, right, you 2 assistants are going to go with that referee. So Mike Malarkey, Darren Can was with Howard Webb at the African World Cup. So in that sense, those 2 ran through the Premier League, and it works. And FIFA started doing that. UEFA started doing that. So I'm clear. The VAR should operate with the same referee week in, week out. If that referee's got an appointment that weekend, the same VAR, the same assistant referees. And they're at the ground. And I'll tell you, as a referee, I've confronted assistant referees when I heard later that an offside decision was incorrect, because I've then said, talk me through how you made such an error. Let's analyze it. Let's look at the videos. Let's try and avoid it in the future, because you get the pain, but I get the biggest pain because I'm the referee, and it's my name that's on the ball to get the criticism. So I want that to happen, because at the moment, what VAR has done in England is created a group of lazy referees.
Very much so.
Not my problem.
That's
my
what
problem.
It seems like from the outside. Yeah.
It's not my problem. It's VAR. He made it. I just followed him.
Yeah.
You know?
Becomes a blame game.
Yeah. So what we've got to do is we've got to stop that. And we've got to stop it sooner rather than later. And therefore, I think there's got to be a team accountability, just not an individual hot potato that's passed from one person to the next. So I certainly want that. Just finally, you cannot be a referee on a Friday in a Premier League game and on Saturday or Sunday be a VAR. You can't be that. You're either a referee or an assistant referee or VAR. And I cannot understand why the Premier League are using the same referees, the referee on a Saturday or on a Friday to be VAR, because that's not what happens in the World Cup. The World Cup have got 26 VAR operators being prepared at this moment in time for that role. So they're specialists. So we want the same. We want the same.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think those are just a few of the changes that need to be made. But I think unless those changes are made, we'll continue to humble, mumble, and stumble, because that's what we're doing with VAR in England.
And that's what's going to continue online as well, with all the irate fans. I mean, it's happening on a weekly basis. I mean, we know ourselves, like we are some of the fans of all these football teams, and to see our teams get penalized for incorrect decisions, it's really a bitter pill to swallow.
Yes,
So,
I mean, you know, when you get to the elite level of the English Premier League and the billions of pounds, 1.5 billion pounds was spent in the transfer window. Every point is worth about £500,000. You know, I'm not going to get into the realms of how much money fans spend on gambling. What you want is honesty, integrity, and I'm not going to question those of the referees. What I will question is the competence of how they are currently operating, referee, VAR, relationship, and lack of accountability. Just one final point on that VAR. I want the referee to be mic'd up as he is, and the screen and the process on the big screen in the stadium. I want that, I want the fan to be engaged in the process, to sometimes see how difficult it is. But I want referees to actually say to VAR operators, I've seen what I've seen. I don't need you, mate. Get lost. I'm going with what I've seen.
Unfortunately, Keith ended up dropping off over there, but like we thank you hugely for coming on our show. We all loved listening to all your stories and all your ideas, and we will be following you on your Twitter account, like every single game, just to get your opinions. We loved hearing what you had to say. But yeah, a very huge thank you as well to Jason and Nikita for being amazing co-hosts as always. Just a reminder that if you are joining us, then hit us up on Instagram, hit us up on Twitter at Sportycast, give us a like on the video, share the video. Share it with your friends, with everybody. We don't care as long as our word gets out. But yeah, I'm AF for 343. I'll catch you guys next time.
Cheers.